Today's program really needs very little introduction, as most of us know her and love her and really appreciate her work in the community. We have with us Mary Jo Morelli today from the Friends of Historic Forest Grove, who will be talking with us a little bit about what's going on, giving us some updates about the Alvin Smith House and sharing some wonderful new things that the group is up to. So please welcome Mary Jo Morelli.
Hi, all of you. I'm pleased to be here. And Bryce reminded me today that I was one of your last presentations before COVID changed all of our lives.
At prime time?
No, it was at the university.
Oh, yeah, right.
It was at the university, and I was in a costume because we were talking suffrage at that time, which is going to be a reminder of that kind of thing again this year, as we're planning a cemetery tour for October 8th. And we're only listing one day at this point in time. It will be at the Forest View Cemetery, but some of our characters will relate to the history of suffrage in Forest Grove. Samantha Coleman, does anybody know that name back there? I knew you would. So Samantha Coleman is one of our people for this year. So we're getting going on that. That's a Saturday. We will open tours for the Sunday once we fill up the Saturday. So that's just the way we're going about it this year. Things have changed a lot. You'll have noticed we haven't done the regular garden tours that we've done in the past. And but we have a new scheme going on, I call it, on my dates. And I should have made notes, but that's not my style. Anyway, we have a series of open gardens coming up. There is an open house on this coming Sunday that is at the Oscar Brown House on A Street, and you have to register online. We have a limited number of people because of we limit things with COVID restrictions for indoors, and we're having a lot more outdoors activities with some gardens. There will be gardens open on June 5th, and the Smith House will be open that day as well. We have Abigail's garden at the Smith House. If you've not seen it, it's a really lovely area off to just right out on the north side of the front yard, and that's open to anybody that day. We had people come through for a scavenger hunt a couple weeks ago and had a lot of fun sharing the house with people. So look at fhfg.org for all the events that are coming up, because we are having to approach things quite a bit differently. The old train station museum is finally back open. It's just been open for about a month now, and they're getting, gearing up, had plenty of time to change displays and do those kinds of things. So I think that's the basics of the organization. We have our annual meeting coming up, and election of new board members and new officers. And I'm no longer on the board officially. And I've been on the board since it was founded. And I have a lot invested there. So I'm going to give you, if maybe some of you don't know, how my interest at the A.T. Smith House came to be. And I was chair. Friends started in 1989, and it was because the Historic Landmarks Board existed. There were surveys being done. That was under Goal 5, a state mandate to survey your cultural and historic resources. So that was in the 1980s. And Friends started because the Landmarks Board couldn't raise any money to do the recognition of historic structures. And so they started doing some tours and incorporated, and that's how it came to be. And the name Friends of Historic Forest Grove, some people periodically go, why do you have that name? Well, we've been at it for over 30 years. People know that name, and let's just let it be. Our focus has changed a lot when we took on the Smith House. So in 2001, when I was a member of Friends of Historic Forest Grove, and I was chair of the Historic Landmarks Board. And one day I opened the newspaper and I found a picture of the Smith House, and it says administrative annexation. As chair of the Landmarks Board, you would have thought the word would have come through the Landmarks Board that something was going on, but it didn't. And I found out in the newspaper, which riled me up a little. And so I started asking questions, and the plan was for Metro to put their garbage transfer station on the location of that house. And they, if you really want to, the house can be moved if you really want to do that, but we need that location for the turnaround for our trucks. And so I called in some people from the Historic Preservation League of Oregon and started attending the meetings. Some of you may have a very different perspective of that time. You may have known what was going on development-wise, but I'm just giving you my perspective. And one thing that cannot happen to a National Register structure is that federal funding may not be used to diminish a National Register structure. That is truly the only thing that can protect it. And so when Metro was asked, do you have federal funding involved in this project? Yes, they did, and that's why the transfer station is on B Street. Okay? So, I became known for, even at that point, saving the Smith House. We're going to cycle another 10 years, and it was when Friends of Historic Forest Grove had our offices in the third floor of Rod Featon's building on the corner of Main Street and Pacific, and I was up there doing some work, and I took a phone call, and it was a lawyer from Salem who had been made a conservator of the Zerker estate. And he says, I've been given your number because you're the only one who seems to know where this house is and what the lot number is. And I said, okay, I know what you're talking about. Why do you need to know? And he said, well, the fire department's going to do a practice burn there. And I said, oh, I don't think so. And because this man was very well versed in historic preservation, he helped us to get a purchase option on the house. And the State Historic Preservation Office put up some money for that purchase option, and we started moving forward. That was in 2001, and the board set up a committee, and we started in on fundraising. We had private lenders. We found private lenders here in Forest Grove, and they put up the money so that we could make that purchase. And we were involved in fundraising. We obtained over $160,000 in grants in those first few years. We did the roof. We did some of the windows were refurbished, and a lot of things that you can't see, because people would keep coming back to the house and say, well, it doesn't look like you've done anything. Well, there's a French drain around the building. There was a lot of money put into that, as well as raising money to pay off the debt. And so we took actual possession of the house in 2005. By 2009, we had paid off our debt, had a mortgage burning party, and remember that time, 2008, 2009, what was going on economically? It was kind of the pits. But Friends of Historic Forest Grove was still plugging along, and we were still, we owned this amazing house, and it's been a long haul. It was Christmas Eve of 2012 when I answered the phone again, and it was an adjacent property owner who we worked with for years, with, for and against. It was a conflicted situation, And he offered to sell us the 3.2 acres adjacent to the Smith house, which would give us direct and legal access to Elm Street. Because this was an issue that had been plaguing us from early on because the lot had been isolated without proper access. And so we jumped in, we went back to the same lenders we'd had before, and they were still game to invest again, and several other people. So we started a process at that point, because there are CC&Rs on that. It's part of the Taylor Industrial Park, and there are CC&Rs on those properties. And so we went through the process of changing the CC&Rs to include recreational use. We also got tax exemption for the property, that being a 501c3, and for both pieces of property, because now we had two. And that put things in place so that we worked with the city to purchase it as a Southside Park. And that will eventually come. But those two things had to happen before the city could purchase it as a park property. Is everybody following me?
Yes.
Is it kind of explaining this whole process? So we sold that part to the city. We've worked with the city sometimes, more actively. Other times, things were just kind of like right now. Things are just kind of cruising along because the city parks has a lot of other higher priorities going on. But we have a great relationship. They come out and mow and our property for us. In fact, they've been mowing our property and not their own. Hey, we can live with that. So we're getting into the time of year when the house will be open, and we like to, Kathy Mandis and I enjoy staging the house so guests can go in and get a feel for what it was like. Yes, there's still lots of interior work to be done. In fact, there's a pretty significant project that we've been working on recently. And if you have been out there, the one window that was glaringly wrong in the house was a 6-foot wide aluminum frame window on the south side, the kitchen side of the house. And back in 2005, when we had that window assessment done, we had some sashes made that have been in storage all this time. And so over the winter, we have gotten one of those sashes placed in that south side opening, and the siding has all been redone, and it's looking really good. Now we have to deal with the concrete that had been that south side porch, which was not an original feature for the house, and so it's sitting there in its ugliness still, but the side of the house is looking really good. It made a huge difference to that external appearance. Several years ago, the house was painted, so it's a bright, spiffy white now, and Abigail's garden was put in. We'd done early on some stabilization in the basement, and 2 years ago, with grant money from the Kinsman Foundation, we were able to put another type of support, because the basement is deteriorating, and if we didn't want problems if one of those basement walls. You need to come out. If you haven't come out, contact me. Come out for an event. Come out anytime. I only live a quarter mile away, and I am out there. Always happy to run out there. The basement is amazing. How many have been in the basement? Oh, good. Quite a few. It's an amazing place because it's a dry stack foundation with bricks on top of that. And so there's some deterioration going on, but now the house is stable. It's not going to suffer because of that. We've been working now on the interior of the kitchen. We came to a stop just this week because we knew that in one of the remodels of that house, somebody had cut out some of the corner brackets. You know what I mean? The timber framing, and you have the diagonal. A bunch of them had been cut out over time. And one of the places we got into, they did not only cut that out, they cut part of the beam out when we got the covering off. And so right now there are not one but two come-alongs strapped across the kitchen and down into the base. One is up high, the other one is down low. So we're getting someone in to, help us finalize the ideas. We had a direction we were going, but we just want to make sure that that's going to be stable. And we're able to move it with the come-alongs. It's settled where it is settled. So it's not like in danger of falling or anything. So there are constant changes, almost on a daily basis, that keep me occupied. Sometimes I'm in way over my head because I'm not a carpenter, I'm not a mechanic, and there are a lot of things I'm not. A passionate historian, apparently, is what I am. Kind of a crazy lady in town who just doesn't let go. But I want you to know how important that house. And you have to tell me when I have to stop talking, Amy, because I'll just talk
I would say
about this.
about 5 more minutes with room for questions.
Okay. The house. Now, why do I keep making such a big deal about this house? This house is a big house for the time period. Smith came in 1841 as part of an independent missionary party. And first cabin got washed out in the winter, rains. Second cabin he put on higher ground. And they lived in that cabin. They took children in to live in that cabin with them. There were, a family came through to, the mother had died on the wagon train coming over. The father asked if the Smiths could keep his daughters. Well, he went to, he was heading for Astoria to look for work, and he was murdered on the way. And the uncle came to Smiths and said, "Can you keep them? I have no way of taking these two little girls." And so those are the two girls that the Smiths adopted. They never had their own children, but they raised these two girls. And as I've done more research, those, he was a tough guy. He was a very religious man, and he didn't put up with, things that, didn't fit his way of thinking. And there were problems off and on, but the girls always ended up coming back, even after marriage. One of them was married, he was out of town and came back and found out she was married. He was really ticked off. That's in his diary. But they came back, and when they married, they came back out to the property. They lived there. They raised their children there. And he helped a lot of people who came. There were some people who had been burned out in the Dalles when there was I'm trying to choose my words carefully because I grew up in one era, and now we're all having to change some of the terminology we use. As an example, we're not supposed to say the Whitman massacre anymore, but that's had a big impact in Forest Grove. It was the Whitman incident now, and there was an incident in the Dalles, and these people got burned out, and so Smith allocated a portion of his property, put up a cabin for them, and they used his land, and they got a share, and he got a share of the proceeds. So he was, in spite of that personality that's come so strongly through of being very rigid, he really did some generous things and really helped this whole community of the West Tualatin Plains to develop. So I wanted to give you some of those stories. Abigail died in 1858, and Abigail was 11 years older than him. But they'd had a courtship of 2 whole weeks before they left to come out as part of a missionary party. And she died in 1858. Well, in 1867, he decided to go back east. And the details are in his diary of his ship journey by boat down to the Isthmus of Panama, traveling across there to another ship, and several different ships, and landing finally, and going and knocking on his brother's door. and saying, "Do you know who I am?" And it had been almost 40 years since he'd seen any of those family members. And while he was there, he married again to a lady 30 years younger than him. And that would be Jane Smith. And so Jane did not pass away until 1929. And so the house remained in that family for that long. And we have some pictures that surfaced in 1991 when those first things were going on about the house. And a lady called me and gave me pictures. There are circa 1900 of the house. The house was one of 2 buildings surveyed in the Historic American Buildings Survey that was in the 1930s, the other one being Old College Hall. So it has been recognized, and it didn't go on the National Register till 1974. So I keep at it. Hopefully there are people who will keep at it after me, but it represents such an important time in our history that I think we're coming to some new understandings with the indigenous people and how that history affected all of them. So it's a huge subject, and I'll talk incessantly from any kind of position on it. Question, John?
Have they given you historic designation yet?
Who, me?
Yeah.
I think so, actually. Yeah. Amy?
What happened to the property between when Jane died and then the Zurchers? Like just a series?
There was another family. It was a Dyke family, and I've not been able to figure out quite which portion of the Dyke family. So if someone wants to look at that, I have the names of the family, and I've not been able to find much information. But it had become a dairy farm by that time, and the Zurchers ran a dairy farm there also. So it's, yes?
Awesome information. Thank you so much for doing all that. I don't think a lot of people realize how much work you had to go through with all the changes that you made to not just the CCRs, but the zoning and all that. So my hat's off to you. Congratulations. My question has to do with your speaking of the Dalles. I'm from the Dalles originally. I grew up there. Do you happen to know the family's name?
By the time I leave today, I'll probably have it to the front of my brain. It's buried in there someplace. But I know how to look it up though too, because I have the most complete transcriptions of Smith's diaries. George and Laverne Williams, who have both now passed away, worked on transcriptions, as did my husband and myself, and Margaret Gilbert worked on transcriptions, and I believe that Dolly Hinman also worked on transcriptions. And so I have a fairly compiled, but there are still sections of the diary that have not been transcribed.
I'm sure.
And that's in Oregon Historical Society.
Is that because no one can read cursive anymore?
Yeah, you know what? There's some validity there, because George and Laverne would transcribe, and David and I would do transcribing of some of the same sections that were really hard to read, and then we would compare them. And after a while, you start learning the person's script, you know, how they write things, but realize these are like, may I take this?
Yeah.
Smaller, a little bit smaller than this. Stitched pieces of paper, kind of a heavy top one they're all pale blue, hand stitched on the edges with pages. It'll be several years of his life, and you can tell he carried in his pocket. It's pencil, done in pencil. And coffee stains, all kinds of stains, but you can just, once you see those diaries, and there are multiples of them, just these little tiny, hard to read. So, yeah. There are still more to transcribe, so we can learn more. He did record a lot about the crops he grew. He was a farmer. It was really important. He was a carpenter. He was trained as a carpenter as a young man in Connecticut, and he was also a farmer. And that's what he recorded, so much information. And he also gave the right-of-way for the train to go through his property. That's why the track is there on the south side of Forest Grove. It was him giving the right-of-way before he passed away. Court.
It would be remiss if I didn't ask you to tell these folks what's going on with the sesquicentennial from your perspective, and hopefully let them know a little bit more about how important this truly is to Forest Grove.
It is. You put me on the spot there to bring my brain back over to another place, because court has been important in getting all that together and expanding the concourse to a multi-day event. And on the day of the true sesquicentennial on October 5th, which is a Wednesday this year, there will be a celebration at the farmers market, and I believe this Rotary Club is involved in that. And we will have a variety of periods. Could be any people dressed up, and if you want to dress up, we'll help you with some costumes. It's the week just before the Wednesday before the cemetery tour, so we'll have some of the characters for the cemetery tour there, doing some routines, and that will culminate as a particularly special event of 150 years as an incorporated city. Are there any more questions? I'll just talk for a while.
Thank you.
There you go.